Alright, let's stink and do this. Alright, so I had an idea. The Bible says we're created in God's image, right? So that means at least part of Him is able to control something that's physical, or maybe it's just that, He's able to affect something physical. Even if something physical can't affect Him, because when you've got the concept of image is that you're able to see something. In other words, he's visible. So, you can't have something that is visible and not have at least some part that's physical, because the way that when you're looking at something, photons are bouncing off of that object and returning to your eye. And that thing is absorbing part of the light that's hitting it. And that's why when you're looking at something, it isn't like just completely all white. When Moses saw God's face, he's described as being, the effect on Moses is that his face is glowing, and the same thing with Jesus in the garden after he's resurrected. They mistake him for a gardener because he's dressed in high priest clothes, which kind of look like gardener's clothes. And those are white. And, usually you've got this notion of white, not as in Caucasian, as in, like, completely devoid of any pigmentation at all. Like, we're talking whiter than albino white. As representing purity, so you've kind of got this concept that God's skin, or just his very essence, is luminescent, and you also get that idea of heaven, like Jesus being the light in heaven. So it's possible that he's just this giant glow bug that's creating ambient light all over the place. So that tells me that, actually, is this thing, it's public, right? Okay, good. I'm just going to park this somewhere so that you're not just listening to me talk, because that's pretty boring. Okay, so what I'm asking is, based on just the information of God is visible, even if he's self-illuminating, a light bulb is self-illuminating. It's got a color temperature, light that's emitting from it. Even the filament in the light bulb, or, if it's like a halogen bulb, the gas is going to be excited and it's going to have a color. So you're still going to be able to make out like facial details and stuff, even if he's like one of those creatures from Cocoon, where they're like glowing beings. Even if it's like that kind of a situation. you'd still be able to make out facial details. And why is that? It's because whatever light he's giving off is either from a internal source or it's from an external source, and it's partially being reflected back at the viewer. In either case, you've got something that's observable to human eyes, which are physical things, or you've got a physical thing affecting at least a physical representation of God, which is a physical thing. So, you've got at least part of God being a physical representation. So the question is, what kind of role does that physical representation play with his non-physical self? I think, this is what I kept getting caught on last time I was doing a cast like this. What role does the non-physical play with the physical representation of God? Because we can't see his non-physical self. Right? When we go to heaven, we've still got physical selves. We've got ascended bodies, physical selves. Where it's talked about in the New Testament that we are reborn with redeemed bodies. So, the indication there is that you're going to have, based on your quote-unquote gifts, you're going to probably have varying levels of superpowers based on how much you kissed up to God in your life here. That's... And possibly slaves, from the people that you've converted. Which, sounds a whole lot like, kind of the big promises that you hear in a lot of other religions. Like in Islam, if you blow yourself up and you become a, quote, martyr. In the jihad, you get 72 virgins. It's that kind of a thing where, you're promising more than the world has to offer to a person in exchange for being an obsequious slave to a fearsome master, which is why Christianity appeals to a lot of people. And probably the reason why it appeals to more people than Islam is just because Yahweh appears to be more powerful than Islam's false god. So, physical versus non-physical. Is his physical self a puppet? Is it just kind of being affected by the non-physical self? Or is it kind of like a gradation where you've got this more crude physical self that's being controlled by progressively more complex and more non-physical forces? That line of what's just beyond our comprehension, that's really a cop-out. God's ways are mysterious. That's really a cop-out from having to think about anything, because it's like, hey, I've got something that's completely scientifically and logically and historically compatible with your beliefs, and it's showing that your beliefs are wrong. Well, God moves in mysterious ways. It's beyond our comprehension. It's like some people will do anything to avoid any cognitive dissonance that results in having to change your theocratic stance. Or theological, not theocratic. That too, but more broadly, theological. I wish I had like a web camera, or not a web camera, like an actual camera, because just sitting here parked at a screen is pretty boring. I mean, I guess I could just show a video of one of my previous videos. You know, maybe that'd be less boring. But I mean, hey, it's keeping the video size small. Staring at just blank space. I think that's probably the most logical thing, because, you know, if you say that the non-physical can interact with the physical, it's like, okay, well, how does that happen? Because physical can't interact with the non-physical, so it can't just be one way. There's in a lot of computer applications, sometimes there's no such thing as a read-only operation, because whenever that information is accessed, so long as it's on a changeable medium, just by accessing it, you can start to change the information in it, which just, I mean, that's not always the case in like ROMs. You know, it's really not possible to change a static medium like that, but you can read it and it can interact with stuff. It's not really an interaction, it's just kind of more of a controlling thing, like the ROM is controlling the thing that's reading it. So in that kind of a situation, would it be more like God is the ROM and we are just feeling the effects of it, doing its pre-programmed thing that cannot be changed? Well, it's different because I think I've talked earlier about it. God is changeable to some degree. At least the things that he does change is he's shown us having regret, like when he's be like, I'm sorry I ever created humanity. They didn't do what I wanted, so that means that they must be bad. I think I'll just wipe them all out. I mean, maybe some that are going along with my agenda, but the rest of them I'll just murder the entire population. So he does have a changeable aspect to him, so it's really a false analogy, because he's not read-only. He actually is interacting with the stuff. So yeah, I mean, there's something holding me back from the position of um, God is, you know, the non-physical part of God can interact with the physical, but the physical can't interact with the non-physical. In other words, it's just unidirectional. Um, you know, and the reason why that I don't want that to be the case is because that means that you can't interact with God directly, like the non-physical part. And that would be bad because then you wouldn't be able to kill him. Even if you're using. But see, the thing is, like, if you're using something that's just like him is non-physical, then you can affect his non-physicality. You can disrupt him with his self. The logic that I'm going after here, or that I'm assuming is the same, is assuming that God's non-physical nature works the same way that his physical nature does, or our physical nature does. If you take, okay, let's say you break off somebody's leg from the knee down, you sharpen it into a shiv, and you just use that bone to break the bones of their skull or break their neck, or use the shiv to separate the vertebrae in their neck, and any nerve endings that would go to the internal organs keeping them alive. So you could kill somebody using their own selves. You can impale somebody on their own forearm. People have been paralyzed, in ways like that, just because their body, they can get killed by whiplash. If you're skiing, this one guy got paralyzed from the waist down because he was doing a ski jump and it went wrong, and it ended up his legs went behind his back, and his feet hit him in the back of the head, and the whiplash ended up paralyzing him from the waist down, I guess. So yeah, you can kill somebody using their own physical selves. Or a short way of saying that is physical things can kill other physical things. So maybe the question I should answer first is, can non-physical things kill other non-physical things? Alright, so if you think of God as more of a uniform gaseous substance, which is evenly distributed in a container, and then you say there is no container and that substance continues for all of infinity, except for isolated pockets wherein there is no, where it's just a vacuum because God can't dwell there because of sin. But he can know what's inside of there without having to see it. He can't look at it, he can't be there, but he can know what's there. And to some extent, he can't even know some parts of what's there. Like, he selectively forgets his people when they turn away from him. Or he doesn't know someone's name because it's not written in the book. Or maybe he does know somebody's name and calls them according to his purpose, but, they don't respond, and so he doesn't keep them down in a specific book of life. So that being said, could you fashion any part of that non-physical substance into a weapon that could be used against him? How do you stab gas with another part of gas? Well, I guess you would use alchemy to change one element into another element. And then use that as a weapon to destabilize the other parts of that element. In other words, you're changing the state of the non-physical thing. But then it becomes kind of a cyclical loop is, how do you change the non-physical thing? Well, you change a part of the non-physical thing in order to change the non-physical part of the non-physical thing. That's not helpful. Just tells me what I can't do, doesn't really tell me what needs to be done. And I think the nail thing still holds up. The holy nail. Not fingernail. Oops, what did I just do? I think I just did something. Did I accidentally delete something? Okay. Yeah, I think the nail thing still works because you're using something which has his non-physical substance in it, and he's got a physical form, so you're disrupting the physical form with something physical. And by disrupting the physical form, you're kind of causing a chain reaction back to the non-physicality that exists everywhere, or mostly everywhere. Because by, if the image of God is in front of you, and it's a physical thing, and it's not, okay, so is the image of God that we're seeing a physical thing? Or is it possible for something non-physical to be touched by something physical? Because that's what light is, right? And it's not really that. I'm trying to find it out from at least the non-physical side first. Like, can something non-physical touch something physical? And I think the only way for him to do that is to kind of have this gradient that goes down to physical. So what I'm trying to figure out is how his God particles work. If you want to affect a Higgs boson, you do that with something that's on the quantum level. You don't use a hammer and strike it against iron and there you've affected a Higgs boson. I mean, they're probably in there, but you're not getting the kind of control that you want. You have to scale it down to something that will work on it. In order to do that, you have an incredibly expensive and involved work of knowledge in order to get that done. So I think it's probably the same way, except a Higgs boson is actually more basic than the atom in which it is a part of. So, I mean, I think that would kind of be like God stepping, like creating equally valid representations of himself at every plane of existence, um, in order to access our physical realm. Is that thunder? It's broad daylight out. It's probably Fort Knox. Um, and see, I mean, what I'm saying here, um, is the same thing that you could say to someone who's trying to push intelligent design, which is that we only know that information or complex things can be created by something that is also complex or more complex. Um, no simple carbohydrates or sugars or proteins can be created except by something which already contains that information or which is more intelligent than it. Therefore, an intelligent creator must exist, and of all the gods that exist, ours is the most valid. Therefore, you should obey Yahweh, and yada yada yada. You can use that same reasoning to say, in order we already know that nothing nothing physical can be affected by something which is non-physical, and say, well, the only way for God to have affected us is to do something at our plane of existence, or to cause something to happen indirectly by going through this chain of stepping of steps down of things that can interact with our plane of existence. I mean, at the very least, if our physical component is connected to any small part or any mutated, altered part of God's non-physical being, if there's like, okay, so he's got an infinite number of differently working particles within him, and none of them operate from how our physics operate. But one thing that's been, one of them has been tweaked, and that composes, and it's also been nerfed, so that it doesn't have God powers. And that's all of our physical existence and his physical representation in heaven. So you've got that not altered state, because that's a video game. You've got that altered thingy, and it affected us somehow. So at least, in some way, it's somehow connected back, even after it's been changed. You can unchange that thing, even if it's really tricky. Back to, you can trace it back to his spiritual nature. And Christians make a big deal about this, about how we can see echoes of God's creation in everything he creates. You can see his image and the similarity between all these things, and it goes back to a single unified creator. Okay? Well, since we've got that direct trace back to him, that means we can affect him, right? Um, you're saying we have a direct link to it, and there's no gaps in any of that procedure where we've been created. Okay, let's follow those back and we can destroy him with it. Because you're saying that because if there was a gap, that would mean that we could exist without him, right? If he's just jumping hoops or, skipping steps, then that means that we don't need him to survive, or we don't need him to be created. Um, so there's got to be a direct link back to his God particles. So all you have to do is take a weapon that can follow that all the way back to his point of origin and disrupt it. If you kill him at a simple level, you can, and it can just be like, because we're made in his image, that doesn't mean that okay, so maybe there's a gap in my logic here. Because then I would be saying, well, if you destroy anything that's created in his image, that means we're destroying him too. Well, what I've seen, logically that would make sense, but in case you haven't noticed, there's a bunch of mortals around you. And there's been people dying ever since Adam. So no, that really hasn't worked. Well, okay. The difference there is that you've got a God who is totally wholly perfect. And, as I've mentioned in previous things, I'm not a Jesus is deity. I'm not in that group because I've looked over it and he never says that he's really divine, and even if other people are saying he is, he's not. He hasn't said it himself, and God hasn't said it. There's all of Israel was called the children of God. And multiple times, people say Emmanuel means God with us. That means Jesus was God, because why else would it mean that God is with us? Well, previous times throughout the Old Testament, they talk about how God is with the Israelites. Okay, so he was always with them, except when they sinned and turned away from him, and then he wasn't with them. So none of that is saying that Jesus is divine. And here is where I'd get a lot of people saying, it's just stopping me and going, here's why you're wrong, blah, 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 and here's why your whole argument is wrong. I'm just thinking to myself, probably nobody is ever going to watch this. I think the 2 views that I've had on the one video I uploaded, I think those were both me, because I was just checking the title and see if it had been processed and everything. And I probably need to add the link to the videos, but I'm not going to do that right now, because I'm on a roll. Actually, I might stop here fairly soon, because I'll probably be getting hungry eventually. Well, okay, so the difference is that, okay, actually, now I'm off my roll. I don't know, I guess I'll just randomly start back into whatever thought occurs to me next, which is God's thingy. Alright, so God's physical representation is a perfect representation of him. It's different from all other representations of him, in that it's a complete mimicking of what he is like on the non-physical level. Um, his glory is seated upon the throne, and we'll be able to see the full extent of his glory in heaven. Okay, so what that means is that he's got a physical form in heaven, and it's probably this glowy, stinking thingy, and he's naked and he's got a robe. And he doesn't need to wear clothes because he's pure and he's unlike his people, which sinned and have to wear clothes. I kind of wish somebody would make some fan art of that, just because it would kind of make things look more absurd, and kind of highlight that. So yeah, he's got a physical representation of himself. And so, what I'm still trying to figure out is, and I think maybe I've answered this to myself, in order to affect physical stuff, there must be a continuous chain from the non-physical to the physical. I don't see any other way of that happening. And in the absence of another theory being in place, mine must be valid, right? I mean, this is what alien conspiracy theorists use, and it's what intelligent designers use. In the absence of any other theory, what we know must continue to be applied in other situations. Okay, so in the absence of evidence showing that something like that information can be created on its own, then what we know must continue to be applied, which is that an intelligent creator creates information. All right, so let's file that back a little further. What we know is that only physical things can be affected by physical forces. If you're talking about two atoms colliding, what has happened? Well, they've both been sent through a particle accelerator. They've been influenced by physical forces. Those physical forces are within the atoms, the magnetism, and it's propelling them towards each other. And we don't really understand everything at the quantum level, so it's not 100% an equal analogy. So yeah, non-physical things have to have affected physical things by stepping down into the physical realm. By creating a proxy of himself at every level. And it's not like, here's mini God, here's larger life-size God, here's planet God, here's omnipresent God, who's just like some amorphous, gaseous, eldritch abomination. It's just like a smooth gradation down to that point where it's perfect control and perfect representation of God at every level. Okay? So Adam and Eve were created perfect in his image, but then, quote, we sinned, but we were actually programmed to have those faults in us. So we're not a 100% pure reflection of who God is. In heaven it's a different story because you're wiped of any differentiating factor, so you end up just being a person with a different set of arbitrary gifts, but are completely controlled like a mind clone of God, where you don't really have any personality or anything. Um, and I think some people say that you have no memory of your previous life in heaven. I don't. I really haven't found too much evidence of that in the Bible, so it's probably a misreading. Um, I, at least, at the very least, people are brainwashed in heaven. Um, that or the criteria is so tight that it's people that have already been brainwashed way before they got into heaven. Um, you're talking about only the most radicals getting into heaven. Um, is this still recording? I'm hoping it is. Yes, it is. So yeah, you've got pure things in heaven, but they aren't God, you know. He exists in all of these places, but doesn't have a physical, centralized representation of himself in all of those places. There's one physical copy of him, and that's sitting on the throne in heaven. So that is the only direct link from physical to physical that we've got in heaven. And no, heaven is not a non-physical realm. There's no evidence of that. And if that were the case, it would make it a whole lot easier. Because then you've got, if everything is non-physical, hey, you've got weapons everywhere. I gotta get on Congregate and claim my points for the day. But yeah, that's the only physical link that you've got. And so, okay, imagine where you've got one person who's tied into a bunch of machinery, and it's like, whoa. I mean, you see this a lot in sci-fi stuff where it's like, we've gotten to the core of the machine. Oh, like Ego. Okay, so you get to the core of Planet Ego, and at the very center of it, you've got Little Ego. Okay, so you're not going to beat this thing. Okay, unless you got something that can wipe out a planet like Galactus, it isn't going to happen. But you can take out this thing, pull the plug on the controller, the man behind the curtain, and you take out the wizard, or you take out the planet. The planet is disabled. The planet will die without the core, Little Ego, and the wizard doesn't exist without his man behind the curtain. So, there's a direct link back to it. Because this is a good visual analogy here. Because you've got these tendrils all kind of going from bigger to bigger, or bigger to smaller to smaller to smaller to smaller, all focused in on these dainty little wires that are probably an inch across at most, leading to this techno-organic being here at the center. So I'm assuming that the same goes for God, except in reverse. The more crude thing is us. we're at this level. We're at the thing where we're just made of minerals and stuff that's relatively crude. Um, by the way, I wish they made him a little bit more asymmetrical. I mean, planets, generally speaking, aren't smooth and stuff, like, and don't have bilateral symmetry. Um, okay, so we're on this level, and but we're not, we're tiny. We're this, okay? Except we're way smaller than the Hulk. The Hulk is huge. I mean, he's a Hulk, and then we're like really little compared to him, and then he's even bigger, and then you get bigger and bigger stuff. Okay, going off topic. Um, so you get us, which are just, I mean, kind of insulting that we're made from dust, and he wants to return us to dust, and you're like, you are beneath me. You are the dust beneath my feet. Worship me, pathetic human. You are nothing. Okay. So that's pretty much what God's like. And no, he didn't directly come to earth. Like, he just sent Jesus to do his dirty work. Um, who's following God's heart, but, his heart is global domination. Um, so our crudeness goes back and back to more complex stuff, leading to the most complex thing here at the center. Um, a thing which is way more complex than all this other stuff and is composed of more complex things and energies that we don't fully understand. But we don't really have to in this case because we're just going to take that thing out. And there's also the question of, even, I've mentioned this before, where even secular people will maybe try to stop any attempt on Aya's life because they're afraid that it would backfire and, erase all of creation from existence. Because if the chain works one way and you're planning on destroying that stuff, what's to say it can't go back the other way? Well, you're kind of destroying the link between the non-physical and the physical stuff. So even if you've got this just destruction everywhere on the non-physical realm, without God's intelligent design providing our mutated, altered, more basic version of himself, that non-physical stuff can't really affect us. And then we could just rebuild that link back to the raw materials and strange particles and exotic energies that are in his realm. And then we could just, use those for whatever we feel like using them for. And then there's the thought of, okay, if you're killing God and you've got all these alternate universes being kept in his mind, how does that affect us? Or how would killing God affect them? Well, I mean, as I've said before, he's not. Okay, so now I've kind of trapped myself in a conundrum here. All right, so you've got these abstracted, imaginary things in God's mind, which are real, but they are in God's mind. and he has somehow managed to, I guess, I guess it's more closing off the link to those things. No, I mean, Let me just step back a bit so I can kind of finish up my thoughts on this other situation. What I'm saying is, if you were to destroy the planet, because the way that little ego works is he needs the planet to survive, and he needs to be connected to it to survive. Well, that's not the situation with God, but you've still got that direct connection, where if you were to hit his physical form hard enough, because he hasn't withdrawn that physical form, and he hasn't withdrawn his glory from that physical form, you can still hit him. It's like in Max Steel, where you've got those phantoms in the museum. They have to go solid to interact with something, and that's when you can hit them. Well, God's gone solid. He's got a physical form, and it's sitting on a throne in God in heaven. So you can hit it. You can hit that physical form. It fires a chain reaction back to his non-physical form, and it destroys it. So, even if it's like, okay, even if it would destroy all those alternate universes and stuff, I still have to look after my own butt. I'm trying to save my dimension and my plane of existence, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to have that happen. So now I'm trying to find out if I can have my cake and eat it too. If I can kill God, free the alternate universes from him, and yet still say those things are real, and they will continue to exist after God's been killed, and that I've got this link regarding intelligent design and us. I don't know. I'm going to take a break. My throat is just about dying on me. I got to get something to drink, maybe something to eat.